early on, inshallah, and that's the purpose of this whole presentation. Now, some of the things we're going to talk about, inshallah, in this presentation, we're going to define what siyam, what fasting is. Through the definition, you're able to understand quite a bit about the action itself. Similarly, we're going to talk about the different parameters. What are those things which are required for a fast to be valid? We're going to talk about those things which break the fast, right? And similarly, which things that don't break the fast, and we'll understand both of them in light of one another to be able to make proper judgments. I've also included a section in this where we talk about common questions that people have, and we're going to go through each of these one by one. Similarly, we're going to talk about excuses that are valid due to which a person can leave out the fast, and what constitutes a valid excuse. And with regards to each of these excuses, for example, somebody's sick, right? What level of sickness is enough, is sufficient for a person to not have to fast? These are very important. Finally, if we get the time, inshallah, we'll talk about some of the spiritual benefits of fasting. I know many of us have heard this topic, in Jum'ahs and in other lectures, we've been hearing about some of the benefits and some encouragement with regards to why we should be performing this ritual. But if we have some time, inshallah, we're going to include that as well. One thing that we will not include is some of the more contemporary discussions that might not be super relevant to us. So just to give a background of what I'm going to be going over today, we have a fiqh class, alhamdulillah. Many of the fiqh students are actually here, where we've been going over the book Nur al-Idah. And that book has been going on for almost a year now. And it has a chapter of all the 5 pillars. So we started with purity and prayer, right? So that's the second pillar. And then we did, so it has basically 4 out of the 5 pillars. So it doesn't have belief, right? That would be the study of aqidah. It starts from prayer. So purity and prayer, that's one of the pillars. And then also fasting. So we started with fasting at the beginning of this year, around February. We did 7 weeks of fasting. And the rulings which were in that discussion were a lot more complex and a lot more nuanced than what we'll be going over today. So because I have to go over 6-7 hours of lecture in just 1 hour, I had to cut out a lot of that information and try to keep it as relevant and as to the point as possible. I also have quite a bit of information to go through. So I'll ask everybody that if you have questions, just hold them off. I will, inshallah, after every section, ask around if anybody has any questions. Some of the other topics I had to take out that aren't directly relevant to our discussion. For instance, moon sighting, right? Moon sighting is a discussion that comes up. Similarly, with regards to the month of Ramadan itself, a lot of people pay their zakah in this month. So those discussions will not be covered. And I highly recommend that you do partake in a discussion on how to pay zakah, because that is probably the thing that people make mistakes in more so than fasting itself. Similarly, we also have to give sadaqatul fitr. Right? Sadaqatul fitr is a requirement. It's a type of zakah. It's a payment that we give at the end of Ramadan that has its own rulings. Determining those rulings are also similarly important. So today we're just going to focus on fasting, but inshallah there's still quite a bit just in fasting to go over that will more than take up our time. So first of all, what is fasting? So a basic definition of fasting, the definition of fasting is an eligible individual refrains from fulfilling the needs of the stomach and private part between true dawn to sunset, and that whole action is coupled with intention. Before I go into some of this discussion, I just want to make a point briefly clear to us. When we're talking from the perspective of fiqh, when we're talking from the perspective of jurisprudence, we're talking about that thing which linguistically and effectively constitutes a fast and which doesn't. So what I'm not talking about is how a person should fast. So when I put the definition here of a person refrains from fulfilling the desires or fulfilling the needs of the stomach and private part, I'm not saying that a person should be backbiting or should be lying or should be stealing or any of these things while they're doing their fast. What I am saying, however, is if a person does fulfill or commit those types of deeds or sins, that will not necessarily break the fast because it doesn't go against the definition of the fast itself. So this is something just to keep in mind. Similar to how when we're praying our prayer, if we're thinking about thoughts outside of our prayer, it's not good, but at the same time, it's not something that's going to nullify the prayer itself until we do something which strictly nullifies that prayer. Similarly, when we talk about integrals, so integrals of an action, just to make this briefly clear, are those things which define it and those things which are part and parcel of it. That when those integrals are found, essentially that action itself is fulfilled. So with fasting, it's very simple. You're not eating and drinking, and you also prohibited from sexual intercourse. So a person who fulfills that, technically, is fasting, right? And the time period for that is also determined. The time period is from the beginning of true dawn all the way until sunset. Now, there's some things which are required for the fast. One of those things is an intention. And we spoke about this in the beginning of, briefly, we touched upon it in the beginning of the definition, where it said a person is refraining from eating or drinking coupled with intention. What does this mean? Essentially, this means that if a person just happened to not eat or drink for the entire day, but he never had in mind that he was actually fasting, that fast will not be fulfilled, right? And it makes sense. Similar to a person who's praying their prayer and they're just doing the actions, but in their mind, they don't actually think they're praying an actual prayer. Just like intention over there is necessary, similarly, with regards to a fast, intention is necessary. And that intention doesn't mean, verbalizing something. That intention doesn't mean saying that I'm fasting tomorrow, nawaitu siyama, there's a nawaitu siyama ghadin fi shahri Ramadan, or, whatever that specific phraseology that's employed. That's not what is meant here. What's meant here is an intention of the heart. And I'll give you a simple example. There's essentially only one action that you can perform without an intention. There's only one action. It's an act of worship that will be fulfilled without an intention, at least according to the Hanafi madhab. Anybody knows what that is? Wudu, good. So performing wudu. So when I'm saying a person's wudu will be fulfilled without an intention, what I mean is a person who jumps into a swimming pool, not intending to be making wudu by it. At the same time, he's being taken out of the state of impurity by his getting those portions of his body wet, right? But in this case specifically, when we're talking about fasting, similarly, a person just stays away from food or drink for the whole day of the day of Ramadan, the fast of Ramadan. That same ruling won't apply, meaning that fast will not come into effect until he has an intention that I'm actually doing this fast. I'm actually fasting for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So it says you can form the intention before half of the fast.
Yeah, I'm going to go over that in a second. Yeah, apologies. So yes. So now, when do you have to form that intention? So this is a question that there is a little bit of a difference of opinion amongst the scholars. Some scholars mention that you have to form the intention before, meaning the night before, meaning before the fast actually begins. The night before can go all the way until suhoor. And what that means, essentially, I go to sleep the night before and I'm intending that I'm going to be fasting the next day. Whether I wake up for suhoor or not, it doesn't really matter. According to the Hanafi madhab, you have until the middle of the fast, not the middle of the day, but the middle of the fast, to formulate that intention. And for that, I made a little graphic here. Hopefully it makes some sort of sense. But if you can see, what I'm kind of trying to display here is you have the nighttime, which in this case is 12 hours of the day, and you have the daytime, which is another 12 hours a day. The fast begins right at sunrise, correct? The fast begins at sunrise, which is, the fast doesn't begin at sunrise, the fast begins at dawn, right? Because sunrise is the end of Fajr time. So before the sun actually hits the horizon, when the sun hits the horizon, that means Fajr time's over. Before the sun hits the horizon, the light of the sun comes across the horizon. And once that light of the sun becomes apparent, Fajr time comes in. On the flip side, when the sun has already set, right? The sun has already set and the light of the horizon remains, that's Maghrib time. So Fajr and Maghrib are really polar opposites of one another. Dhuhr time is actually the middle of the day. It is the middle of the time between sunrise and sunset. So if you take that calculation, what is the middle between sunrise and sunset? That's when the sun is directly above you, because we're tracking the movement of the sun. Therefore, the beginning of between the end of Fajr time and the beginning of Maghrib time, that is going to be the middle of the day. That's Dhuhr time. However, when we're talking about the middle of the fast, we have to understand the fast includes all of Fajr time, but it doesn't include any of Maghrib time. Hopefully people are following me. So because it includes all of Fajr time, it's actually skewed on one side. Meaning, when we're talking about the middle of the fast, that's going to occur marginally before the middle of the day. This is just something to keep into account. And this is a common misconception people might have or a mistake people might make. When we're talking about the time that you have to make an intention, it is a little bit before the Dhuhr time. And I can give you a simple way to calculate this. If you guys follow me with it, it's fine. If you don't, no worries. The simple way to calculate this is you take the time of Fajr, the entire time of Fajr. So if Fajr is coming in at 5:20 and it's ending at 6:50, that's about an hour and a half. The entire time is an hour and a half. Half of that is 45 minutes. I take those 45 minutes and I subtract that from Dhuhr time. Once I've subtracted that from Dhuhr time, that's going to be the middle of the fast. Again, if you're following me, you're following me. If not, maybe those who understood it can go over with those who didn't. So what are the conditions that make Ramadan, the fast of Ramadan, obligatory upon a person? There are, in brief, 7 conditions that I mentioned here. And essentially what this means is that if a person complies with all of these conditions, the fasting of Ramadan is necessary and it is fard upon them. Fard is the highest level of necessity. There can be no level of necessity which is higher than that. So a person has to be a Muslim, a person has to be sane, meaning there's definitions of that and what exactly constitutes somebody who's sane or insane. I don't think there's a time or place for that. A person has to be mature, meaning a child who's past the age of maturity. And there's 2 essential parameters for this. One is the automatic age of maturity, which is calculated on the lunar year, meaning a boy or girl that passes this age automatically is considered to be mature, regardless of any other external circumstances. For a boy, it's 15 years of age, again, through the lunar calendar, which will be about 6 months before their actual 15th birthday in the Gregorian calendar. Similarly, for girls, it is 12 years of age, and that's again with the lunar calendar, regardless of, so it's going to be, a number of months, probably about 4 months before the 12 years of age in the solar calendar. And again, regardless of the other requirements. Now, there are certain requirements for boys and for girls that would make them baligh. Again, this is not the time and place to go into a lot of detail with regards to this. If anybody has any questions, they can always come back after and ask. But essentially, anybody who's past the age of 15, right, has to fast. There's no question about it. And it becomes fard upon them. Similarly, they have to have a level of knowledge. I'm not going to go into what this exactly entails, but this is talking about a concept that we have in fiqh with regards to a person who accepts Islam in the middle of an island where there's no way for them to actually attain knowledge. We're not talking about the situation where a person just doesn't know. If a person just doesn't know, their ignorance is not excused. We're talking about a person who didn't have the ability to gain knowledge. And why we're having this discussion is if that person then moved to a place where he did attain knowledge, does he have to make up the fast of all that time which they had missed? Right? These are, again, concepts of fiqh. If you're more interested in this, for more, join our fiqh class. Alhamdulillah, we go into these discussions in a lot of detail, and I consider them very enjoyable. I don't know if anybody else does. So next is health, sound health. And we're going to talk about what exactly that entails. Meaning if a person isn't healthy, technically they can leave the fast, right? Not saying that they don't fast. We'll talk about what exactly that means. Similarly, a person who's a traveler, they can leave the fast. If they fast, will their fast be fulfilled? Yes, it will. However, they are permitted to leave the fast, or permitted to not fast. If they don't fast, they are not under those conditions which make fasting obligatory and fard upon them. So therefore it's excused. And then similarly, purity for women from menstrual period or postnatal bleeding. Talk about that inshallah briefly as well coming up. Now it's interesting for women in this case, if they aren't eligible to fast in Ramadan itself, they still have to make up those fasts later. And this is in contrast to prayers. So a woman who's in the state of menses or in the state of postnatal bleeding, which happens after childbirth, that woman will not have to make up those prayers that they miss. However, they will have to make up the fast that they miss. Okay? Finally, residency. Residency means a person not being in the state of traveling. There are requirements for that. What exactly entails travel? Hopefully, we'll get to some of those discussions later on. Okay, any questions on what we've covered so far? Good, okay. So now we'll talk about those things which break the fast and which things do not break the fast. And over here, I just want to make it clear. With regards to things which break or do not break the fast, there's 3 categories. There's 3 broad categories we could put everything into. The first is something which doesn't break the fast at all. All right? So a person commits a certain action of this nature, your fast is valid, you should continue your fast, and there's no reason for you to stop. Similarly, there are those things which break the fast, but they don't require kafara or expiation. And the kafara is a penalty which comes upon a person by breaking a fast in a specific way. That kafara entails fasting for 60 days straight as a penalty for having broken the fast, and then also making up that fast that you had broken, so it becomes total of 61. The 60 days have to be consecutive. The one fast can be fasted separately. We'll get to that inshallah as well. However, there are certain instances where a person, his fast is broken, but he doesn't have to give kafara. He doesn't actually have to give that 60-day penalty of fast. Why is this the case? The reason this is the case is because a penalty is only for a crime. And similarly, a penalty is only for an egregious crime. So for instance, a person, he accidentally took in food or water or consumed something. It was an accident. He didn't intend to actually break his fast, but now his fast is broken. However, will that person now have to give a penalty for having broken the fast? In this case, no, because he didn't actually fulfill a crime or fulfill something which was at that level of egregiousness. However, a person, he just straight up went and, that chocolate mousse cake in the fridge was looking really good from the night before, and he just couldn't hold himself. He goes and he eats it. In that situation, not only is the fast broken, but also kafara becomes necessary. We're going to talk about some of those reasons why kafara could be made necessary and kafara could be not made necessary. First of all, that which doesn't break the fast. Obviously, we understand that most things don't break the fast. So this is not a comprehensive list. Otherwise, I would say walking, talking, walking, talking, or everything pretty much that we do in our day wouldn't break the fast. These are examples of actually consuming something, but in this specific situation, it doesn't break the fast because of a situation. One of them is things that do not enter the stomach or brain. What this means is the fast is essentially refraining from eating nourishing food through certain pathways, and that food is going to go to your stomach and it's going to nourish you. Right? If a person consumes something in a circuitous manner, something which does not really follow that definition of consuming something as it would be defined quite literally, in that situation, their fast wouldn't be broken. I'm going to give some examples of this. Similarly, forgetfully consuming something. There's three definitions here: forgetfully, accidentally, and intentionally. And again, we're going to talk about what exactly those three mean. Finally, something which is unavoidable. Something which is unavoidable is determined as something that you really didn't have a choice to refrain from it. Right? And the example given is like secondhand smoke, or like a fly is just flying around and it just goes straight into your mouth. You had no control over that fly not being consumed in your mouth. Because you didn't have control over it, you are not required to abstain from it. And with regards to this, I'd like to remind us of the definition of fasting itself. The definition was refraining from food or drink. Refraining is an action in and of itself. It is something that a person does. So in this situation, he didn't not refrain from food or drink. It just so happened that something ended up being consumed by him. Therefore, the definition of fasting is still completely valid. And therefore, his fast is also, by extension, completely valid. So now examples of things which do not break the fast. And we're going to go through this list in order of what we talked about on the slide previous. So on the slide previous, I said that those things which do not enter the stomach or the brain do not break the fast. So similarly, a person is applying oil to their body. Now, obviously, you understand that's not actually going to your stomach or brain. Yes, the pores in your skin might be absorbing that oil, absorbing that lotion, but that doesn't mean it's actually going through your esophagus, through your, into your stomach or into any of your digestive system, your lower upper intestine or anything of that sense. Sorry, I'm studying biology, so I get a little geeky sometimes. So it doesn't actually enter into your digestive system in and of itself. Instead, it's being absorbed by other parts of your body. Similarly, applying eyeliner, kuhl. So this is really interesting. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail a little bit further ahead. But we have to understand that a person putting eye drops into their eye will break the fast. And the reason for that is just like when you cry, you actually have a runny nose. And the reason for that is those tears enter through certain ducts and they come into your nose. Similarly, when you're applying eye drops, it's going into your nose. And from your nose, it has a direct passage into your digestive system. So therefore, in that situation, it will actually break the fast. When we're talking about applying eyeliner, you're not really applying it. Doesn't like us. Alhamdulillah. Okay. So when we're talking about applying eyeliner, you're not actually applying it into those glands itself. You're applying it onto the top of your eye. And it's similar to applying lipstick. So applying lipstick is also not impermissible. Although if that lipstick is going to be going into your mouth, I was reading in the fatwa that would be considered makruh or disliked, but it wouldn't be considered impermissible. You're applying something on the exterior of your body cavity, essentially, and that thing isn't really going directly into your mouth. Similarly, applying eyeliner, this is actually something that the Prophet ﷺ, he would apply kuhl, and he would do it while he was in his fast. Water that's entering into the ears. We're going to talk about this also with regards to the ears. Usually with non-perforated ears, as they say, which meaning the ear doesn't have an abnormal hole inside the ear itself, which is most people. Whatever you put into your ear will not necessarily go into your, esophagus, won't necessarily go into your digestive system. Therefore, in these situations, it will not break the fast. So even ear medicines that a person puts in, that will not necessarily break the fast. And I'm fully aware that this is going to directly contradict the slide which is coming up. So please hold on to that for a second. Hold on to that thought for a second. Similarly, cupping. So cupping, if we understand, this is the act of hijama, where a person, they would essentially take out a little bit of blood from different parts of the body. We can understand that anything which goes directly into the blood, into the circulatory system, so not the digestive system, we're going into the circulatory system, we're going into the blood, that's not going to be directly connected to the stomach, that's not going to be directly connected to the digestive tract. Therefore, a person who's cupping, or even taking injections, or taking a vaccine, right? Whether that vaccine is, intravenous or it's intramuscular, whether it's going into your blood flow, your veins, or whether it's going into your muscles. In either case, that does not break the fast because it does not go directly towards your stomach. Finally, certain other examples of things which wouldn't break the fast. If you intended to break the fast, you're intending to break the fast. Once you've made an intention from the beginning, that intention will last, as long as you don't do anything physically which contradicts the fast. So therefore I say, you know what, I don't want to fast anymore. I'm going to go eat. And then I decide, I'm not going to eat. As long as I didn't actually take something in, as long as I didn't actually consume something, my fast is valid. Similarly, eating, drinking, or having sexual intercourse while in a state of forgetfulness. And I'm going to touch on this in a second, inshallah. Unintentional inhalation of smoke or dust. A person just walking, there's a dust cloud, it goes in, you didn't have control over that. Swallowing a fly, similar. Tasting or chewing something, so long as it doesn't enter the throat. So in this case, if you have something, you put it in your mouth and then you spit it out. You're making sure for it not to go into the throat. Technically, it's permissible. However, there's some nuance here and there's some issue here. One of the questions we get asked often is it permissible to brush while you're in the state of fasting? So the scholars that have done research on this issue, they say that when a person's brushing, they're really turning over all that saliva in their mouth, and those parts of the toothpaste will go into the throat, and it is completely unavoidable. Right? So a person brushing is vigorously moving that toothpaste all around the body. He's stimulating all that mucus being moved through, his mouth, and eventually it's inevitable that certain portions of that toothpaste will go into the stomach, will go down, the digestive tract will go into the stomach, and it will break the fast. However, if a person is basically just chewing something, and there's two things here, we spoke about this in the fiqh class. When we're talking about chewing gum, we have our gum of today, which is like, your Trident or Extra or something like that. You put that in your mouth, it has certain, I don't know what it would be called or what it would be defined as, but it has certain elements within it that are designed that when you bite into it, they mix with your saliva, they give you a sense of taste, and they actually go into your stomach. Right? So for instance, you're chewing a Trident, you'll be able to feel them. They have these little blasts of flavor. And those are designed to mix with your saliva and then be swallowed. The actual gum itself is not something which you swallow. That's when you take out that gum, all the color is gone, and certain juices and certain things which are in that gum are completely gone. In the past, they used to just chew like literal gum. So there's a name for this, it comes from trees, but they would literally chew gum. And this is actually common back home as well. So that gum, because it's not meant to go into the stomach, because it's not something that when you chew it, it's going to be digested, it is not something which would break the fast. Similarly, if you had food, but you were careful, you ate the food and you spit it out right away, and you cleaned out your mouth as much as possible. So when we're talking about gum, you're chewing and it's in your mouth and you're salivating and you're chewing for an extended period of time and it's going into your stomach. Whereas if you're just tasting food and spitting it out, clearly you're being very careful that it's just touching your taste buds, but at the same time, it's not mixing enough with your mouth and being moved around enough for it to go into your stomach. So when we say that chewing something is permissible, there is a limit to how much you can chew something. There is a limit to the types of things that you can chew safely while understanding that the thing won't be going into your stomach. Finally, wet dreams. We're going to talk about this, but just to relate it back to what we said before, this is something which is unavoidable, right? Just like a fly going into your mouth or dust flying into your mouth is something which is unavoidable. Similarly, person goes to sleep, they wake up, they had no control over that wet dream taking place or not. Therefore, it's completely unavoidable. So the second category are those things which do break the fast, but they also require kafara. And I explained this in brief previously. I said that a thing which breaks the fast and requires kafara is really at that level of being egregious enough that there was no reason for him to have been eaten. There was no misunderstanding. There was nothing that you could use as an excuse on behalf of that person, and they just simply ate. And so the scholars mentioned certain things which would amount to that level of egregiousness. One of those things is eating something, consuming something which is not nourishing. And what I mean by this is when we're saying a person is breaking their fast, we're saying they're literally going, let's say we're talking about food, they're literally going and eating actual food. Now, what if that person is eating pebbles or eating mud or eating certain things that a person normally wouldn't eat? So it's not at that level of egregiousness, right? It's not at that level of a person simply just going and fulfilling, their desire of having food. Therefore, that person technically, their fast will break, but they also will not have to pay kafara. Now, the question that I get now is does this mean that if I want to break my fast, I quickly swallow a pebble and then I go to the fridge and I eat whatever I want, right? We're not talking about what your consequence in the akhirah is, right? We're not talking about what your consequence in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Because we understand that on the Day of Judgment, deeds are not measured, but they're weighed. And what does this mean? This means that there's a lot of other factors which are involved in gauging a person's action. Two people can be praying the same prayer, but one person can be doing it on the back of much more sacrifice, or much more, concentration, devotion, and much more effort, and therefore that person will be rewarded more. Similarly, a misdeed that a person does, based on the situation. If a person did it, he had really no excuse, or a person did it to get out of a situation, you can get out of it in terms of the rulings of the dunya. But when we're talking about the rulings of the akhirah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything that we do. We have angels that write everything that we do. So, second is consuming that which is not detestable. So, okay, the first was that breaking Ramadan fast in its time. I want to explain this really briefly. When we're talking about kafara, we're only talking about two things. Actually, three things. There's three things implicit within that statement. One is breaking the fast. So a person never actually decided to fast. They never fast the day of Ramadan. They never formulated intention. Maybe, these are the days of Jahiliyyah, they would just not fast. In that situation, a person never broke the fast. So kafara technically isn't binding. You just have to make up that fast itself. Kafara is a penalty specifically for having broken the fast. Similarly, it has to be a Ramadan fast. So if I'm fasting the 12th of Muharram, I'm fasting a nafil fast, fasting any other fast in the year, breaking it will not necessitate kafara. And the third is that it has to be in its time. So if I'm doing qada of a Ramadan fast, if I missed a Ramadan fast from last year, I'm making it up today. But at the same time, in the middle of the day, I break my fast for whatever reason, I do not have to give kafara. So there's three things implicit in that statement. Finally, there can't be any extenuating circumstances. We're going to talk about some of those examples, inshallah. So some examples. First of all, sexual intercourse. And we're going to talk about there's three levels of sexual acts and how each of them have a different ruling. But a person, just like eating, similarly fulfilling your desires, whether that's through marriage or through zina, as long as it's through the proper channels, in that situation, a person will have to give kafara and their fast will be broken. Similarly, eating or drinking purposefully, whether it's for nourishment or medical benefit. So a person popped some pills, or a person, he was just hungry and he ate something, or he needed a certain medicine. Now, if he was in a situation where he really needed that medicine, where he could have died without taking that medicine, then kafara would not be binding because that's an extenuating circumstance. That's a valid reason for that person to be eating something or taking that medicine. Similarly, a person who eats something because he has the fear of actually passing away, or he has the fear of causing permanent bodily harm, right? So for instance, malnutrition, it does cause permanent bodily damage. We know that to be true. A person maybe who's in diabetes might need to take insulin for whatever reason, or a person who's undergoing an asthma attack might need to take an inhaler or something along those lines. In the situation where they know that not taking this medicine or not eating this food is going to cause me permanent damage, or it's going to affect me significantly to the level that I might pass away, there's a chance that I might pass away, that would obviously be excluded from this ruling. Finally, intentionally swallowing rainwater while it enters the mouth. And by the way, this is termed as examples for a reason, right? This is not an inclusive list. The reason these examples are given is to give you a general idea of how this works in a broader context. So a person says, well, the water falling into my mouth was something which was unavoidable, right? Technically true, but you swallowing it was something which was avoidable. That was something you did on your own accord. So like we said, a fly going into the mouth, in that situation, yes, if it goes all the way into the throat, you had no control over it. Yes, your fast didn't break. But if you had control over it, if the fly stopped, on your tongue and then you swallowed it, that's completely different. Now you've actually included something which is of your own action. So that's what we're trying to define here. Trying to define where is somebody doing something out of their own accord and where is something just happening without, any part of their own in that action itself. Similarly, this we're going to talk about in more detail when we talk about those things which don't break the fast. Eating things which are considered edible or things which are nourishing. So anything which is considered edible and nourishing, that's something which will break the fast and also require kafara. There's examples of this given up here. We're going to give some examples of stuff which aren't edible or aren't considered edible, and I think you'll like those, inshallah. So those things which break the fast, but they don't require expiation. This is really an inverse of the slide that we had before. So we're just talking about things which, aren't nourishing, for instance, or there's a specific extenuating circumstance, or they did it on the back of misinformation or some misconception that they had. And these are some examples of that. Briefly, I'll go over some of these examples. One is, for instance, a person is eating something which isn't considered edible. And there's a list up here. There's not a list of things that you should, take a note of that when I'm hungry, I have to follow this list specifically. But paper, cotton balls, dirt, pebbles, and we can include flies and stuff on there too, flies and spiders or whatever. Similarly, unintentionally inhaling smoke. So over here, we're talking about things which aren't nourishing, things which aren't really considered to be legitimate, like food or something which is considered something which will fulfill a person in a very specific manner. So we know that a person smoking does actually break the fast. They are inhaling smoke, and they're inhaling essentially a compound which is in the gas phase. They're inhaling it into their stomach. So that will break the fast. But in this specific situation, because it's not at that level of egregiousness, because it's not at that level of being very flat out and simple and straightforward, in that situation, kafara will not become necessary. Similarly, sexual satisfaction in ways other than sexual intercourse. So over here, we're talking about is any type. So on one hand, we said that a person who underwent a wet dream, and we'll talk about this in a couple slides coming up. Person who undergoes a wet dream, it was something which is unavoidable. Because it was unavoidable, that does not break the fast. Similarly, the scholars mentioned a man who has an orgasm just by seeing something which is stimulating or hearing about something which is stimulating. In that situation, it was unavoidable. It had no action on his own. But any type of physical contact, which would then make that person enter that state where he enters a state of janaba, then that would break the fast. But because he didn't do it in the most egregious of manners, which is through sexual intercourse, the fast will be broken, but kafara will not be made necessary. Similarly, being forced to do anything. So if you're forced, this is extenuating circumstance, or this is something which is in a sense unavoidable. Your fast will break. Somebody forced you to eat something, somebody forced you to do something. Your fast will break, but you will not have to pay kafara. With vomit, we're going to go into that. There's a bit of detail with regards to vomit as well. Accidental consumption. So remember, forgetful, accidental, and intentional. These three words are important. We're going to talk about those in a second. But accidentally consuming something, yes, it does break the fast, but no, you won't have to give kafara. Not ever forming an intention to fast. So you never actually said or told yourself that I'm actually going to fast today. Similarly, like we mentioned, I've included it in breaking the fast, but technically you never formed the fast, so you never broke it. You do have to make up that fast later on. Yes, you don't have to give kafara. Similarly, a person, there's a couple of situations here. A person forgetfully ate, and then he thought that his fast was broken, so then he kept eating. In that situation, because he had some sort of misunderstanding, because he thought that for some reason maybe my fast broke, in that situation, his fast, yes, it's broken because of that intentional eating after forgetfully eating, but he won't have to give kafara. Similarly, the time of the fast has begun, but you're still eating suhoor, and you didn't realize that I'm already 5 minutes over, I'm already 10 minutes over. That's a misunderstanding. Yes, your fast is broken and it's invalid, but at the same time, you don't have to give kafara. The time of iftari came in, but you didn't come in. So there's still 5 or 10 minutes left for iftar. You thought it was iftari time. You started eating, right? In that situation, because you started eating with the intention that it's already iftari time, therefore the fast is broken, but kafara isn't binding. Go ahead. I need to hide you because it's right there. No worries, inshallah. Okay, so it's important to explain a few terms here. One is, what's the difference between, as brother asked, intentional, forgetful, and accidental? So intentionally means that I know I'm fasting, I pick up the water bottle or the food and I eat it. That's something I had an intent. I knew I was fasting. So both of those things are included. So I think the easy way to understand this is consider 2 different factors that are being involved. And actually, come to think of it, I should probably put it like that on the slides. One is, do you remember you're fasting or not? And the second is that, did you have an intention to consume that item or not? Okay. So when we're talking about intentional, we're saying you knew you're fasting and you had an intention to consume that item. When we're talking about accidental, we're saying you knew you were fasting, but you didn't have an intention to consume that item. For instance, an easy example for us is you're taking a shower, you know you're fasting, you're being careful with the way you gargle your mouth, but you gag and you swallow some water. You knew you were fasting, you didn't intend to swallow that water, but you accidentally swallowed that water. In that situation, your fast breaks, kafara isn't necessary. However, in the situation where you had no idea that you're fasting, whether you eat intentionally or not, that's considered forgetful. So for instance, I wake up in the morning, I don't realize it's Ramadan, and pour myself a bowl of cereal, I'm just going at it, I'm just eating. And then I realize, oh wait, I'm fasting. So because I didn't know that I was fasting, right? That will be considered forgetful, meaning I forgot that I was fasting. Does that make sense? So I'm going to quiz us all for a quick second here. So what's the ruling for somebody who forgetfully eats? No kafara, what else? And the fast continues. Good. What if somebody accidentally eats? No kafara, but fast breaks. And then if a person purposefully eats intentionally, depends what he eats, right? If he's eating a cotton or paper, then that's. So this is that slide that was saying that it goes against what I said previously. When we said those things which break the fast, they have to enter through one of the pathways that go into the stomach or the brain. And these are what the pathways are defined as. One of these pathways I wrote here was the ear. So this excludes somebody who's taking an injection. This excludes somebody who's taking out blood, right? Or this excludes somebody who's doing cupping or any of those types of procedures. But I did include the ear up here. And the reason I included this is because the scholars of the past generally considered the ear to be a pathway to the stomach or the brain. If a person has a medicine with which they have to pour into their ear, the fatwa generally given is that it does break the fast. Whether it's the eye or the ear, either one, it does break the fast. Okay? But in specific situations, I would ask a mufti specifically, and I would ask them with regards to your situation, if something that's completely unavoidable, you have to take certain ear drops, then in that situation, a dispensation could be given for you. Go ahead.
So, what if you're using swab?
Yes. Yes, you can use miswak, as long as you don't swallow the bits of it. Yeah.
What about as far as applying cologne?
Completely valid. Yep. Completely valid. Yeah. Why would it be valid? Based on what we've learned so far.
Because you're not consuming it.
Good. It doesn't nourish you, but also based on that slide that just came before, based on this right here. You're applying cologne to the exterior of your body. It's not a pathway. It's not going through your mouth, your nose, your ears.
Cologne, anything that's
Totally.
external.
Totally. Yes.
What about as far as sometimes I know that there's another question too, that when it's how sometimes
Uh-huh.
the steam comes.
And the steam comes. Good.
What is the ruling on that?
Okay, so it's a good question. So I did mention that smoking breaks the fast. Yeah. So yes, the question was, so the question was that a person is in the kitchen and there's some, smells of like biryani, pakora, everything's, so does that break the fast or not? So it depends technically, because I said a person who's smoking, it does break the fast, right? So there's two things here. One, is it intentional or is it unintentional? If you're just in the kitchen, you're going to smell stuff anyways. Are you purposely taking whiffs of that item, or you're just standing around, you're smelling? So if you're just standing around and the smells are going in your nose, that's completely unavoidable, right? So that doesn't break the fast. If a person intentionally wafts smoke, then it will be looked at that how much smoke will actually break the fast. So when we're talking about hookah or we're talking about smoking, the scholars do say that that is a good amount that a person is ingesting, which will actually break the fast. I haven't seen any scholars saying that any type of food is, enough for that to occur. Wallahu alam, I just wouldn't recommend standing directly over food and taking in wafts. But generally, it's not an issue. Yeah. Incense. Oh, that's a good question. So usually, if you have, so I know that our teachers, they would specifically refrain from using incense or bakhur in Ramadan for this reason. But still, usually if you have incense and it's just around you, you're not putting it under your nose and smelling it. If you are doing that, it's kind of a gray area. Where do you define that as being a large amount of smoke inhalation? If you're doing that, you're doing it purposefully, I'm not sure. I'm sure there's a barrier there at some point where it becomes, like vaping or something like that, where there's an amount of smoke that you're intaking that would necessarily break the fast. Go ahead. No, because candles are a lot less potent than what he's talking about. I think what he's talking about is like burning those, the oud, either the wood, or the cubes or whatever form that you have. Yeah, good questions. So some common questions that people might have. And now I'm going to ask you guys what the rulings for each of these are. So first of all, injections or vaccines. What's the ruling? You're good. Good. Why? Why wouldn't it break the fast? It doesn't go through one of those pathways. So because it doesn't follow a pathway to stomach or brain, the fast will not be broken. Next, eye drops or ear drops. What is the ruling? It will break the fast. Which one of the two? Both. But more for eye drops, right? More for eye drops. For ear drops, there's a difference of opinion amongst the scholars today. And many scholars mention that it depends on what the person's ear is, if they have a perforated ear versus a non-perforated ear. I don't know medically how much one is common versus the other. My father's a doctor. I did ask him and he said the same thing, that some people have perforated ears where for whatever reason they do have a hole, in the specific barrier that they have. But eyeliner is permissible. Why is eyeliner permissible? Good. It's not, you're putting it on the top of your eye. You're not really putting it into those glands itself, just like putting something on your lip, like lipstick. Good. Smoking. It breaks the fast. Good. So smoking will break the fast. Does it require expiation? Kafara? No, it doesn't. Why doesn't it require expiation?
It doesn't nourish.
Good. It's not really nourishing. It's not at that level of basically egregiousness that would. So yeah, and unintentional secondhand smoke, what would that do? It doesn't break the fast. Good. Because why? Exactly. You're not doing anything. It's unavoidable. It wasn't something that happened on your own. Okay. So with vomit, now I have to explain this. So there's two different aspects to a person who's throwing up. One is, did they throw up intentionally or unintentionally? Okay. If a person threw up unintentionally, did they swallow that vomit back in or did it come out? So the scholars mention if a person vomits unintentionally, and then the other question is whether it's more than a mouthful or less than a mouthful. And what's defined as more or less than a mouthful is a mouthful is something that you couldn't really easily suppress. It comes out in force. Less than a mouthful, it just kind of came up and you swallowed it back, maybe came up to your mouth, but you could keep your mouth closed. More than a mouthful is defined as something where you're not able to suppress that urge, you're not able to close your mouth in that situation. So when we're talking about vomit, if that person vomits unintentionally, there's only one situation where their fast will break. If it's number one, more than a mouthful, it was uncontrollable. And then two, they intentionally swallowed it back. So they were vomiting a good amount. Some of it was left in the mouth. They swallowed that right back in. That will break the fast. Now I'm going to ask you guys, will that require kafara, expiation or not? No, right? Why? What was the reason you give? I'm making you guys the muftis today. No, he did it on purpose. Let's say he did it on purpose. True, but he didn't have to swallow it. It's not nourishing. It's not food, right? It's not something that you would usually eat. Okay, so if it's intentional vomit, so when we're talking about intentionally vomiting, whether you swallow it or not, if it is a large amount of vomit, so you induce that vomit, you put your finger in your mouth, or you do something which you know will cause you to vomit, if it is more than a mouthful, whether you swallow it or not, that will break the fast. All right, everybody's on pace. So most of the time, vomit doesn't break the fast, which is contrary to popular opinion. A lot of people think that just because somebody threw up, that means that their fast is broken. That's not necessarily the case. Only if they threw up and they swallowed it back. So if you do have a situation like this, may Allah protect us, you should clean out your mouth, right? And make sure that you're not swallowing anything back in to your mouth. Okay, so with sexual activity, so now there's 3 levels, right? What are the 3 levels? One is unintentional. Good. So unintentional, or meaning something that you had no control over. So for instance, a person had a wet dream. What would that necessitate? Doesn't break the fast. Good. So good. That was the first one. So the second one. Now, what is the second level? Good. I like that. I'm using my definitions that I made up. So it's intentional, but it wasn't at that level of egregiousness, meaning the person had sexual discharge, probably due to physical contact, but that wasn't in the form of sexual intercourse. So in that situation, what happens? Good. Breaks fast, but no kafara. And then the third situation, if a person had sexual relationship, then that will break the fast and they'll also require kafara. Awesome. Okay, now this is one other interesting situation, and this is a ruling that many of us might not have known. And for me, when I found out about it, it was a huge relief.
أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله هو أكبر الله هو أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Okay, so now this is the situation where it happens to all of us. You eat suhoor in the morning, and then you always have something left in your mouth. And this also applies that when you're making wudu, you usually have a little bit of taste of the water at least left in your mouth. You know, when you can spit out all you want, but some of that taste will remain. So the scholars mentioned that thing which is just that minor amount will be considered to be unavoidable. So similarly, when you're making wudu, you spit out a reasonable amount. You don't have to go overboard on this. That taste which is in your mouth will be considered unavoidable. Similarly, a person who eats something before suhoor and there's taste left in his mouth, there's certain things left in his mouth, that is considered unavoidable. And they actually quantify this to say that the aggregate amount, the food that's in your mouth, if it's the aggregate amount of a chickpea, okay? So a chickpea, you can like kind of vision it in your mouth. So if you took all that food, whatever was in your mouth, put it together and it was that amount. If it was more than that, that would be considered something which you could have cleaned out of your mouth reasonably. If it was less than that, and let's say the fast has started and it's in your mouth, it's stuck there from before the fast and you swallow it, completely permissible. Your fast does not break. If there's more than the amount of a chickpea, then yes, your fast does break. But in this situation, does kafara become binding or not? No, why not? No, you had a good suhoor, man. No, he did this on purpose. So the reason this is because there's a sense of there's a misunderstanding that could come into play here. Similar to because less than that was permitted, a little bit more than that is not permitted. So similarly, because there's a bit of a misunderstanding, or there's a way that this person could have misunderstood the situation that's going on, therefore it won't actually require kafara. Okay, so those are those two situations. Now, this is some detail about expiation. It's on your slide, so you can always go back to it and look at it, inshallah. Things which are disliked in the fast. Tasting food without any valid reason. Anything which will tempt you to break your fast. Similarly, if a person involves in kissing or certain things which they know that they can tempt them into breaking the fast, for that person it will be extremely disliked to engage in such an action. Similarly, tasting, I would also include intentionally smelling food, right? Any of these things which could lead to a person breaking their fast. Similarly, a person is taking certain medical procedures, like they are doing hijama, they're taking blood out of they're donating blood, and they know that they're very weak, right? I donate blood, I'm going to become very weak, and I'm going to be tempted to break my fast. In that situation, it will be disliked for the person to engage in any such action. However, if they know that I'm okay, I will not break my fast, I've donated blood before, and it's not going to make me weak, in that situation, it will not be impermissible. Or it will not only be impermissible, it also will not be disliked. It will not be makruh. One of the points on here to point out, this is those things which are not makruh, are not disliked. Miswak, using a miswak. Whether that miswak is damp, whether that miswak is wet, or whether it's dry, in any situation, using that miswak is not disliked or impermissible. The only thing you have to be careful with the miswak is that those little spindles, those little fibers, don't actually get swallowed into your mouth. Right? Make sure you spit those out. Okay, that which is recommended. There's only two things which are recommended in a fast. Delaying your suhoor as much as possible and hastening your iftar. And the reason for this is because fasting means we refrain from eating or drinking only in that time which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has stipulated to refrain from eating or drinking. We don't add any time on that on our own. We don't subtract any time on that on our own. A person just recently asked me a question about fasting a day or two before Ramadan. And there's a hadith about this. The Prophet said, do not fast 1 or 2 days before Ramadan comes. Similarly, fasting on the day of Eid is completely impermissible. What this basically teaches us is, just like for Isha Salah, we're going to pray 4 rak'ahs and not 5. Similarly, for Ramadan, we're only going to fast in the month of Ramadan. We're not going to try to extend this action on our own, considering it to be an act of piety. That leads to bid'ah. So similarly, in this situation, delaying suhoor, eating iftar as quickly as possible. Now, very briefly, it's going to take 5 more minutes, inshallah. We're going to talk about some of the excuses for which a person can leave the fast. These are the 5 excuses. All the parameters are mentioned on your slide. So you can always go back to them and you can always look at what exactly these parameters are. Firstly, a person who's sick. So a person who's sick, you have to basically look at 2 things. One is either your disease or your sickness or injury, whatever it is going to be aggravated by me fasting. The second is that the delay that's taking place is going to be, the recovery that's taking place is going to be delayed delayed in any specific way. So I'm sick, and by me not eating food, by me by me fasting, essentially I'm going to be delaying my recovery. How will this be determined? You have to ask a doctor. And the doctor, a qualified Muslim doctor, will tell you, in your situation, your fasting is either going to hurt you, it's going to harm you, or it's not. And based on that person's advice, you will follow through. Similarly, a woman who's pregnant or nursing. So in this situation, if there is fear of any type of harm being imparted on the child who is either in the stomach, or the child who is dependent on the milk of the mother, in any type of harm which could be feared upon that child, that woman is permitted to then leave out the fast because of that child. That child doesn't have to be her own. It could be another child which is dependent on her, right? She could be the foster mother of a different child, but because that child is dependent on her, she has permitted to leave out the fast. For traveling, the requirements for a traveler are the same requirements that apply to a person who is traveling and they are able to reduce the amount of, or they have to reduce the amount of prayer they're praying from 4 rak'ahs, let's say, to 2 rak'ahs. And that requirement is a person is outside of their city limits 48 miles. They make an intention to travel and they're outside of the city limits for 48 miles. One thing which is notable here is you have to be traveling before midday for this to take place. So if a person is planning to travel after Asr time, that will not make it permissible for them to then not fast from the beginning of the day. You have to be traveling before midday. And the way to do this specifically is you also have to not formulate an intention to fast in the beginning of the day. Because you have until midday to make that intention, you don't make that intention before midday, let's say before 11, 11:30, whatever. You are outside the city limits of your city. Now you can choose not to fast because now you're in the state of being a traveler. I'll get to your question just in a second. So there's details about this on the slide as well. You guys should have the slides. I'll put the thing up at the end. Finally, two people, a person who's elderly and a person who's sick. Both of them are allowed to give fidya. They're allowed to give fidya because both of them, while they're not able to fast at the moment itself, there's also no hope of them fasting in the future. So a person who is in a terminal illness, a person who is frail and old and elderly, and they know that I will not be able to fast in the future. They're able to give a fidya for their fasts. That fidya will be given after the fast passes. Right? This is another question. People, they try to give fidya in advance. You have to wait till the fast passes. Therefore, that fast is binding on you, and then the fidya is binding on you, and then that fidya is given on that person's behalf. The amount of fidya is mentioned up here, 1.6 kilograms of wheat, or its equivalent in cash. If you want to know the details about that at a specific time, you would ask scholars or you'd ask charitable organizations. Usually they have that calculation with them. Finally, so making up Ramadan fasts. So now let's say you missed a fast of Ramadan. Now that fast of Ramadan could be made at any time. And what I wanted to point out specifically was if you've missed a fast from a previous Ramadan, you do not have to make up those fasts before fasting the fast of this Ramadan itself. So if this Ramadan came around, you're required to fast the fast of this Ramadan. After Ramadan passes, you can go back and fast those fasts that you need to make up. Your question. Yeah, that's a good question. So in that situation, technically, they don't have to fast as long as before midday they are in a state of traveling. Conversely, if a person was in a state of traveling in the beginning of the day and they reached their home before midday and they hadn't eaten in the morning, they technically have to fast. So if you know that you're going to reach home and you eat before that takes place, in that case, now you're not eligible to fast, then you don't have to fast. But you didn't fast in the morning, you reached home before the time of intention has expired, so you still have the opportunity to make that intention. Now, because you're in a state of residency, the fast of that day of Ramadan is binding on you. So that's a good question. I was just asked this today. I believe not, but I will double check that inshallah and get back to you. I'll double check that. Is there any questions on Zoom or from the sisters? Go ahead.
So if you start your travel after the point of fast, you have to continue fast, right?
If you start your travel after the midday, yes, you have to continue fast. Correct. So, and the sisters, you had any questions? Wa alaikum salam. What if you can't pay the fidya? So technically that fidya is still binding on you when you get the money. So if a person in this current situation, they're not able to pay the fidya, they don't have that amount of money, it won't be binding on them at the moment. But when they get that amount of money, which is enough to pay the fidya, it will become binding. And if they pass away in that situation, then 1/3 of their wealth will be used to pay off the fidyas, no more than that. So if their 1/3 of their wealth was enough to pay off the fidyas will be paid off. Otherwise, Wallahu alam, we hope in Allah that that person will be taken into account for that, because that's outside of a person's own ability. Any other questions from the sisters? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
What was the mile?
48 miles.
Is that the aggregate going back?
No, that is one-way miles, and that is from city limit to city limit. So if I'm going to San Francisco, you look at where, basically from Union City right now, so I'm from San Jose, so that's why San Francisco is useful for me. Over here, San Francisco is super close. But let's say I'm going to Sacramento, then the city limit, so when I'm going, if I'm going to Sacramento, let's say through 880, through the north, right? So then where the city limit of Union City comes in, which would be around, where Hayward starts, that city limit until where I enter into Sacramento. You take that route that you've traveled, not the distance that the crow flies, but the distance of your driving miles, that route that you're taking. If that route is more than 48 miles, that travel will be considered a safar, will be considered a legal definition of a travel. Go ahead.
So you can't brush your teeth, you can use the miswak, right?
Correct. So you can brush your teeth without toothpaste, right? So if you don't use toothpaste, you can brush your teeth. But if you're using toothpaste, that's what specifically is problematic. Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure about that. That's a good question. Yeah, because mouthwash, yeah, no, it's reasonable because mouthwash you specifically spit out. So I'll have to find out about that. I'm not sure. Allahu Akbar. Yeah, because mouthwash, you're really trying to get that mouthwash to get all the stuff in your mouth and then spit it out. So yeah. It has a strong taste, but the problem isn't that taste being in your mouth. The problem is that taste going into your throat. So things being in your mouth, technically that doesn't break your fast. If you put something in your mouth and you take it out, that doesn't break your fast. The problem is, does it go into the throat or not? So even if that mouthwash is inside your mouth, it's there, it's giving a good smell, that doesn't really make a difference. Yeah.
So they have like a Listerine spray that you put on your tongue. It's like 1 or 2 sprays.
Interesting.
Consume it, and you have to spit it out right away, but if it makes your mouth all fresh and everything. Is that what you do?
It's interesting. I would have to look into that. So I actually used to have some sort of I don't know, I had some issues with my throat. So they gave some sprays that would kill the bacteria in my throat. So I would take it similar to that. You would kind of spray it down. And I'm thinking with the Listerine spray like that, you're saying you have to spit it out. I'm wondering if it's there because, is it there to kill the bacteria on your tongue?
Yeah, on your tongue.
Or in your throat? Okay, on your tongue. Yeah. Yeah. I think I'll have to double check that. I would want to stay in contact with people that I need to answer questions for. Yeah. Yeah. So what we'll do is, I think it's that time as well. But what we'll do is, anybody who have to answer the questions, do come up to me afterwards, inshallah, and give me your contact information. Go ahead.
And just very quickly before you guys leave, just so you know that inshallah we'll be looking for the moon tomorrow night. So please look at Majal Huda website to figure out if Ramadan or Tarawih will be tomorrow night. Jazakallah khairan.